Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and I've got a question. Whatever happened to salvaging in Elite Dangerous? Well, as you can see in the video in the background, it was very much to be a thing, and I'm sure it's going to be a thing at some point in the future, although that time don't seem to be yet. You know, I perhaps could have put salvaging on my most recent top 10 most anticipated updates for Elite Dangerous. It didn't quite make it. There's many things I do want to see in the game, and this didn't quite make the list, although I think it's going to add a lot of depth to the game. Now, what we got here in the background is an early concept video from Frontier during the early development phase of the game, showing what salvaging could perhaps be like. And in fact, there's plenty of information on the official forums, on the design documents under what salvaging should be about. So what do they say? They say salvaging specifically represents the ability to make money from the husks of ships and abandoned structures. A ship, husk or structure can be scanned using mining sensors to identify potentially valuable assets that can be mined from it. So essentially what they're saying is that salvaging should represent or mimic mining and use exactly the same equipment that we now have, which includes the limpets and drones or whatever they're called, and that when you come in and find a derelict vessel like the one in the video here, you'll be able to go in and essentially mine it, breaking chunks off it and taking away the most valuable parts, or perhaps if you want to, the lesser valuable parts, depending on what you're able to find from the ship. Now, there's only a limited number of parts you're about to mine from a ship, and that makes sense. I guess not all of it's valuable unless you sell the whole thing for scrap. I guess it would be nice if you could tug it away, but that's not the design. What I like here about this actual video here is that we're seeing a very early prototype version of an Anaconda here, and you can see all the internal workings of it, the internal structures that are there, all the decks, the cargo holds and everything else. David Graben spoke quite a lot of times about how this would be in the game, so hopefully it should be in there soon, especially when we get to walk around. It gives you somewhat of an idea of just how big the Anaconda is and all the areas you'll hopefully be able to visit when on foot. Now, the design document goes on to explain how occasionally you're about to find some very rare metals or minerals from some of these ships, and that probably makes sense. I don't know if that would be from the hull itself or whether that would be from the cargo, but either way it sort of makes sense. Now, there was also a whole section on salvaging and the law, and that salvaging would be illegal in most jurisdictions. The authorities there, the people that own the ships, don't want you going out and salvage them. I guess they belong to the companies that own them, and they don't want you taking away their parts. But you're about to buy a salvaging permit, which would allow you to mine in those particular systems, but the permit would be time limited and it would only apply to the particular system that you've purchased it for. And then there's also the thought that maybe players would leave husks and salvage behind when their ships are destroyed. That would add another layer to the game, wouldn't it? I think quite an interesting one at that. So salvaging was very much intended to be a thing, and I'm quite sure that it still is going to be a thing. Pretty much all the game mechanics necessary to do it are already in the game, because we do mine, don't we? And all the mining equipment is there, as well as the game mechanics. So essentially it would be the same thing. You'd just be mining from shipwrecks rather than rocks. But perhaps it would give you other things to salvage, including some of the lost cargo that could still be contained within the ship. And then perhaps you'd have other scavengers to deal with, because they'd probably want to take the same thing off of your hands. As well as the fact that if it's illegal and you're doing it illegally, you'd still have the police to contend with, wouldn't you? So that is salvaging as discussed by Frontier on their design documents in the official design archived forum. But I like to think it could be taken a little bit further than that, not necessarily going outside of their design, but extended further into the other areas of space. After all, there are 400 billion star systems within the game, and every day commanders are going out there into the void looking for the unknown, and we know that many of them don't make it back through one reason or another. You've seen me myself nearly come to a rather unfortunate halt a few times on my expeditions out there, and these ships should perhaps leave wrecks behind, shouldn't they? Now, there is no server within the game to track persistent wrecks. Most of these things all happen on peer-to-peer connections, so they essentially happen on players' computers and are only administered and monitored by a server. But that said, wouldn't have thought there's any reason that the servers can't generate random instances of salvage areas just in the same way that they do unidentified signal sources, and sometimes you find debris fields there. Finding some of these out in the depths of space would be quite interesting, especially for those of us that go out there with a cargo hold. We might only take 4 cargo units or 8 cargo units or something very limited like that, but there could always be the off chance that we find something out there. And I'll get to something in just a minute of an example of an object that already has been found out in space that seems to be unknown and a little bit alien, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But before that, let's have a look at some of the other things that we know are potentially out there in space. As I said, commanders do go out there, but we also have civilian ships, and that's, if you look at the NPC ships, they're not actually commanders. They don't have commander on their names, so I'd like to class them as civilian ships, and they sometimes go out into at least a few hundred light years outside of civilized space, so I'm sure some of them get destroyed as well. Outside of that, Elite has a rich lore, has very rich in-game history, and one of the things right from Elite 1 that evoked a lot of imagination and discussion and curiosity from people were the generation ships. What are generation ships? Well, those things are very, very interesting. This is what the game's lore has to say about it. Before the development of the WS through space drive in all its various forms, interstellar travel occurred in large, self-sustaining environment ships, generation ships, most of which have now been logged and their progress monitored. There are more than 70,000 of these immense vessels ploughing their way through the galaxy, some of them into their 30th generation. The penalty for interference with such a vessel is marooning. So essentially, these were ways to get people out into deep space to build new colonies. They have been travelling out there for hundreds of years, from generation to generation, people living out their lives in their entirety aboard these huge vessels, and then their children living out their lives, and then their children's children, and so on throughout the ages. Meanwhile, back in civilized space, technology developed at such a pace that we eventually developed a hyperspace drive and were able to reach the destinations way ahead of these generation ships, which are now in interstellar space, that area between star systems, lost in the void, heading slowly to their destinations. And of course, that process is not allowed to be interfered with. People within the galaxy have a legal duty to let those ships continue on their journey and not interfere with what has been going on there. And that makes sense, it's understandable. But that said, would all those ships make it to their destination? It says most of them have been logged, but I would imagine that not all of them have been logged, and perhaps some of them have come across failures of some sort. And these would make some of the most interesting targets of all to salvage if there were derelict generation ships out there. Just imagine the sort of things that could be found. There would be products on there that are hundreds of years old. Some of the stuff essentially becoming artifacts, and who knows what sort of cultures would have emerged on those ships over that intervening decades and centuries. Now, there's no reason that salvaging would be limited to human artifacts and human ships. There are, of course, aliens out there. We know that because we know the Thargoids were in the previous games. Well, let's have a look at what the Elite Wiki has to say about the Thargoids. The Thargoids are an insectoid alien race who are said to originate outside of known space, perhaps existing in a parallel universe or spatial dimension. Thargoids are one of 2 known sapient species in the galaxy, the other being human, although artifacts of other races have been found. Of course, a lot of the galaxy remains unexplored, so there may be races not yet discovered, but we should expect them to be quite rare. The Thargoids are very hostile and aggressive and have not been interested in diplomatic relations to date. It has been rumoured that the Thargoids could be capable of building large artificial structures which could possibly be on the scale with the planets, and certainly be large enough to negate a ship's warp ability. So, there has been war with the Thargoids in the past between them and humans, but at this point no one knows where the Thargoids even are. They seem to have disappeared. And there are in fact people within the galaxy that doubt that they even existed within the first place. But relatively recently, within the game, something very interesting has happened. Just take a look at this. This is the unknown artifact, and it is of unknown origin. No one knows what it is or where it come from or what it's trying to tell us. That footage was recorded by Commander Red Wizard, and this footage was recorded by Digiscream. I'll link to both the original videos in the video description. Some of you may already be aware of this, quite a lot of you have probably already seen it, but in either event, this has created quite a stir within the Elite Dangerous community. Frontier have told us that these are not just random sounds within the game, and that in fact there is an encoded message within there. So all manner of people with all manner of backgrounds, from mathematical to audio engineers, are trying to decode the signal that's coming from that artifact, and as yet no one has had any success. There are a bunch of threads on Reddit, and there are quite a few threads on the official Frontier Elite Dangerous forums, and again I'll link to both them below. They should give us a little bit of information on what this is all about. Now within the game, it turns out that I believe the Federation are very interested in the artifact here. I think they're calling it an alien artifact, and it's actually been made illegal within the game to be seen carrying this. If you've got it in your cargo hold, you will get a massive fine, and it's quite possible that they may even attack you. But they also sell for quite a reasonable amount of money on the black market if you do have one. And of course, if you do happen to have one, people are interested in seeing it for themselves. So it's a case where people are arranging to meet each other in space and dumping the thing outside of their cargo hold so that it can be looked at and studied a little bit further. Whilst strictly speaking, some may not class such artifacts as salvage, I'm of the mind that anything that's been left in space and abandoned could be classed as salvage if you collect it and pick it up, whether that's scrap or something of high value or unusual and unique unknown origin, such as the artifact there. So when this sort of thing, when salvaging does eventually make it into the game, hopefully it's more than just a case of salvaging spaceships, and we will be able to find and uncover all sorts of rare things that have been lost, abandoned, or otherwise left in the depths of space. Okay then, I think that just about covers this topic. I do plan on making a few more videos like this, so if there's any topics you'd like to see covered about anything really to do with Elite, whether it's to do with its future, whether it's to do with Elite's history, any of the previous games, or even some of the lore behind the game itself, let me know in the comments and I'll see about making a video about that subject. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.